Now, the South African Youth Economic Council says it rejects new legislation promulgated by Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana on procurement procedures involving BEE laws and state-owned entities. The new law aims to revoke specific regulations within the Preferential Procurement Regulation. The Council's national spokesperson, Sthandiwe Msomi, joins us now in studio to let us in on more on that. Sthandiwe, good to have you once again tonight. Thank you very much for your time. It seems from these changes, institutions such as Eskom, Transnet, Denel will no longer have to be disqualified suppliers just because they do not meet the BEE requirement. Is that the sum total of the changes, or is there more?
That's the sum total of the changes. And what the regulations are doing is that it's leaving it up to state institutions and SOEs to come up with their own policies on procurement. And if you look at that and you hear the comments of, Mteto Nyati, one of the new Eskom board members, on how BEE legislation is putting on red tape and it's making it difficult to do business, it really makes us worry as a council, because BEE is so critical to ensuring that there's an intentional mechanism to integrate black business into this economy. And government in itself spends at least 1 trillion rands on public procurement. And so if legislation like that is being scrapped, one wonders who that 1 trillion rand is going to actually go to.
Yeah. So, I mean, seeing arguments around it. The fact is that it's not BEE that Mteto Nyati is against, but it's the corruption, for example, that comes with it. The fact that, you've got this BEE policy that is being used to give preferential treatment to particular cadres and individuals, and so money is funneled that way. So others arguing particularly that, well, deal with the corruption, find ways of dealing with the corruption and not change the BEE.
Of course, deal with the corruption. But I also think that the corruption conversation takes away from the fact that no one is talking about why businesses and SOEs feel the need, or feel that rather procuring services from black-owned enterprises is extending costs and is making doing business very expensive. Yeah. We should be asking ourselves, instead of getting rid of that progressive legislation, how is government capacitating black businesses such that when they're looking for someone to procure goods from, they find that person easily? It's pathetic that we still have the excuse that it's hard to find a company in renewable energy to bid for the bid windows. Yeah. We should be asking ourselves, are we doing enough to invest in black-owned companies for them to be able to compete in that? I mean, we have the bid windows now for the just transition and moving to renewable energy. And no one is talking about how no bid, no contract should be awarded to anyone before a black-owned youth company actually participates in that bid, or legislation is actually crafted for that. And so to hear that BEE is being put in question just makes us afraid that this economy is going to move forward into a renewable energy era, into a digitized era, while leaving black businesses behind simply because government is not doing its job through DFIs.
So what do you think is really happening? Because, I mean, for example, Eskom says we need to buy a spanner. The nut is broken. And for us to be able to do that, we have to go through a cumbersome procurement process. And in most cases, we've got to go through a middleman.
Yeah.
And the middleman inflates the price, and we're going to pay 200% more than what we could have paid if we went directly. How do you deal with that situation?
I think what we first need to ask ourselves is, how can we solve that problem of the middleman? And while the BEE legislation that we have has been quite progressive, no one has spoken about how the companies themselves that bid for tenders don't grow or don't go beyond being a small or medium enterprise business, because you hope that through doing business with the state and accumulating profits and revenue, you're able to grow your business such that you're not just buying a door or a nail from a supplier, but you yourself build the capacity to do that. And we should be questioning if the Department of Small Businesses is actually doing its job in ensuring that these companies that apply for funding from CFI and CEDA actually grow and become large enterprises. So it's not for us to attack the whole system of government procuring goods from the public, because government is the largest procurer of goods and a big integral part into our economy. It should be, how can we ensure that black people actually benefit from that system? And by the looks of it, revoking the BEE criteria is just very regressive, and it takes us 10 steps backwards from where we are now.
Yeah. Big issue is that youth companies, black-owned companies, maybe by and large, don't own the IP. And
of course.
At some instance, so they won't be able to create that stuff. They have to go and buy it somewhere.
Yeah.
And how do we build that capacity?
It starts with, I think, our fiscal policy, right? At the beginning of the year, Minister Enoch Godongwana told us that he's decreasing corporate tax by 1% to try and incentivize companies to spend more on employment and other things that benefit society. But we all know that a capitalist system doesn't really do that. People find a way to distribute profits in their own way that benefits themselves, right? And so if you don't have fiscal policy that is pro-poor, pro-working class, that invests in our communities, then you obviously won't have a child in Mlazi or in a township wanting to innovate and create the next digital platform that will go big and, be able to turn it into a business. And so I think it starts with progressive fiscal policy that realizes that the state needs to develop black communities first so that we're actually capacitated to compete and develop our own intellectual property that generates revenue. But we also, I think, need a bolder government and bolder African states because I think we saw with COVID-19, many of the pharmaceutical companies refused to release the IP behind the vaccines that we've had. Until this day, African states have failed to mobilize around that and I guess promote that vaccine as something that is in public interest, not for private corporations to commodify and make profits off of. And so I think combined with progressive fiscal policy and African governments that are very decisive and clear about creating environments where African people themselves can develop, then I think it'd be able to benefit from the systems that people right now are trying to actually break down.
Yeah, it's very good cop, bad cop. I'll be the bad cop and talk for those who would say, yeah, well, affirmative action would need to take second place when it comes to energy security, because what does it help for us to say we want to do BE, affirmative action, when the lights are going to be down? The very same young people will be faced with an economy that has collapsed and that is not growing because we just don't have the power.
I think that is not true. I think that there are young people who are in universities right now who are getting skilled, who are educated, who are engineers and economists. And the biggest thing that they complain about is the fact that they don't have the capital to participate in these industries. And so we have the skills, we have young people who are knowledgeable in these industries. And the same thing that the National Party and the apartheid government did to capacitate white-owned businesses is the same thing we should be seeing our own ANC government doing for its people if we want to see young people with all these bright ideas actually be integrated into the mainstream economy. Because the argument of, it might take a while for us to be able to develop energy security. Yes, there may be trade-offs that have to be made in the process, but what's the point of trading off, the ability to develop black young people from participating in the economy long-term and shortchanging it for foreign investment in foreign companies that want to supply us with energy, which will in itself leave us in debt in the next 10 years from now, as we've seen from historic years. Yeah.
So if you were to be in the audience of the minister, what would you want to say to the minister about this move that he is taking here? I mean, is the minister, in your view and your sense, abandoning the transformation agenda?
Of course. I would even call for the minister to be removed from office if that's something that he wants to carry on. Because in a country where unemployment is so rife, in a country where there's around 3 million young people who are not in employment and education and training, one wonders where they'll end up. A lot of us are where we are today through affirmative action, through BEE, from our parents being beneficiaries of that system and then being able to participate in the economy after democracy. And so to let that go and think that the free markets will solve itself and provide us with all the goods and services that we need is quite a careless and reckless decision to make. And I would call for him to not just look at the decision to revoke BEE, but to look at how he can look at other aspects of National Treasury's budget and ensure that even if these policies are being taken, what are we doing to ensure that black businesses can participate in the economy productively? And that requires us to address the issues of capital still being concentrated in the hands of big white-owned conglomerates that have been in existence from the days of colonization, to moving that capital in itself to black communities and black companies. Because it's quite callous, I think, to just revoke BEE policies and not do anything to capacitate black communities to actually be able to participate in the economy that we want to create, which is inclusive and transformed.
Yeah. What do you say then to some of the, should-be beneficiaries of this policy who are saying, this policy, all it does is actually enrich a few. It works for those who are connected. So it might as well go.
that argument is warranted and it's valid, and it's unfortunate that we've seen that through corruption over the years and abuse of the BEE policy. But what I think is quite critical for people to understand is that South Africa exists in a world that is dominated by capitalism, and we still operate in a market economy. We haven't reached a reality where socialism or communism is the way in which our economy operates. And so whether or not we'll get to that future, we are not sure, but before we get there, we don't want poor people to still be black in this country. We want to ensure that there's still the possibility of black people benefiting from the capitalist system that we live in today. And that requires artificial intervention by the government through affirmative action policies, through BEE, to actually include people who have been excluded by past systems. And it's the nature of the beast that we look at when we look at big capital and capitalism.
Sthandiwe Msomi, as always, thank you very much for coming in and for your intervention tonight. Certainly, this would have sparked a lot of debate, and we want to reach out to the Minister of Finance, Enoch Godongwana, maybe to explain himself a little bit more in terms of the criteria of how he is coming up with this policy that he is now promulgating, or at least the changes that he is proposing. In Focus continues shortly for you. Stay with us.